Today, let's cover 6 common mistakes that Japanese language learners tend to make. There are a number of lists that cover this topic out there already, so I tried to choose ones that you may not have seen covered elsewhere. We'll cover 2 vocabulary mistakes, 2 grammar mistakes, and 2 pronunciation mistakes. Although the 6 points that we'll cover in this video will help any Japanese language learner, if you are a little bit more of a serious learner and you have at least about an elementary level of knowledge already, you are more likely to benefit from it. Welcome back to another video. If you don't already know me, my name is Sachi and I am a Japanese teacher and translator. I have 2 one-of-a-kind online courses, one called Japanese Phonetics 101 and the other called Japanese for Flight Attendants. Feel free to check out the description below for free resources and some more information if you're interested. 皆さんこんにちは。心コミュニケーションズのサチです。今回は日本語学習者さんが間違えやすい6選についてお話しします。Let's jump right into the first 2 common mistakes that we'll be covering in vocabulary. We have 2 standard ways of apologizing when you're speaking in the standard level of politeness. They are ごめんなさい and すみません. They are similar but not exactly the same, which can get a little bit confusing, so let's take a look at them. ごめんなさい and すみません are often, but not always, interchangeable. ごめんなさい means sorry, and it does express a desire to be forgiven. It is moderately formal. You can make it less formal by shortening it to ごめん and potentially adding ne on the end of that to get ごめんね. すみません means excuse me, and it is used to apologize and basically move on. The only way to make it less formal is to pronounce it as すいません. In many cases, we'll specify what it is exactly that we're apologizing for by adding a phrase along with either ごめんなさい and すみません when we say it or write it. For example, you could say 遅れてごめんなさい or 遅れてすみません with an optional でした at the end of that if you'd like. Both would be correct, but the nuance is a little bit different. In the first one, you're asking more for forgiveness, and in the second, you're apologizing, but you're also kind of indicating that you're ready to move on to whatever needs to be done next. We are more likely to use the second option with coworkers or people we may not know too well, and we are more likely to use the first one with people we know a little bit better. When talking to friends or family, we may make it less formal by simply saying 遅れてごめん. The second common mistake in vocabulary that we'll go over with is one that you'll probably want to be careful with. In English, I feel like a tissue is a thing made of paper, and it's often used to dry tears, blow our noses, clean our hands and faces when we eat. A napkin, I feel like, is a piece of fabric that we use to cover our laps, clean our hands and faces, again, usually when we eat. In Japanese, tissue is more or less the same thing as tissue in English. It's a dry facial tissue that we use to wipe our hands and faces, but napkin are sanitary pads used by people who menstruate. So just be careful with your use of the word napkin when you're speaking with Japanese people. Let's now move on to the next 2 common mistakes in grammar. We use the particles ni, e, and de when talking about places, but are you confident about when to use each one correctly? Let's go over each and then look at an example. Ni has a few different purposes. It marks destination, but it also marks an indirect object in a sentence, a specific point in time, and a period of time that something repeats in. It can be used instead of ni to mark a destination, and it is considered a little bit more formal. It doesn't really do much else. De, like ni, has a few different purposes. It marks an area or duration of time, or a method, tool, or circumstance when something happens. It also marks the material or substance of an item. Let's look at an example sentence that uses all 3 particles. 土曜日に電車で公園に or 公園へ行きませんか?土曜日に電車で公園に or 公園へ行きませんか? Ni is used twice for the day, 土曜日, and location, 公園. The only place that it is used is for the location as an alternative to using ni. De is only used once in this example sentence to indicate the method of going to the park. If we have 公園に and 公園で as our options, we would know that the first refers to the park simply as the destination, but the second refers to the park as a place in which some act occurs. So we can say 公園に行く and 公園で走る. But we cannot say 公園で行く or 公園に走る. Those last two are not correct. The second grammar point is about keigo or formal Japanese. For Japanese language learners working on improving their formal or business Japanese, it is not uncommon to misuse sonkeigo and kenjougo. I used to struggle with this too. Let's clarify the difference between these two categories of formality. Keigo is the term we use for any and all forms of polite Japanese. Within the category of keigo, we have both sonkeigo and kenjougo. The main difference between them is as follows. Sonkeigo is used when talking about somebody else's actions. This includes people like your customers or clients, guests, bosses, and teachers. Kenjougo, on the other hand, is used to talk about your own actions, or the actions of your immediate family or co-workers who are considered to be on the same level as you. As an example, let's look at the verb kuru. Kuru is the dictionary form. Irashaimasu is the sonkeigo form, and mairimasu is the kenjougo form of this verb. So if we want to say the teacher is coming, we would say sensei ga irashaimasu. And if I am coming, then I would say watashi ga, optionally, mairimasu. It's not correct to say watashi ga irashaimasu. Last but not least, the two common pronunciation-related mistakes. The first one is about long vowels. Because spoken Japanese has very different rhythms from languages like English, for example, it is not uncommon for learners to lengthen or shorten vowels when they shouldn't be. Let's look at an example pair of words. We have obasan and oba-san. One more time, that's obasan, oba-san. You can immediately see that there's one extra vowel in one word and not the other, but can you hear the difference too? Obasan, oba-san. Japanese has something called a mora, and it's kind of like a timed syllable. Basically, you want to think that one kana is one beat. So obasan should be 4 beats long, and oba-san should be 5 beats long. These two words should take you different amounts of time to say them. Let's look at a few more examples. Oji-san, oji-san, chizu, cheese, koto, koto. The second common pronunciation mistake, and the final one that we will go through in this video, is related to pitch accent. I highly recommend you spend a little bit of extra time learning about this and training your ears to be able to hear it a little bit better if you haven't already done so. There are 4 different pitch accent patterns in Japanese. They are called atamadaka, nakadaka, odaka, and heiban. There are a number of different resources online if you want to just learn the basics, including a few videos that I've done. Let's look at an example of how pitch accent can change the meaning of a word. We have jishin, which is an earthquake, and jishin, which is oneself. Jishin, jishin. Can you hear the difference? You may be aware of the debates that often seem to occur online about whether pitch accent is actually important to learn, and ultimately it is your decision, but if you tend to lean toward the idea that it's not important, let me ask you this one quick question. If you were learning Mandarin Chinese, for example, would you argue that learning the correct tones for the words is also not important? Okay, let's quickly summarize the 6 common mistakes that we just covered. Firstly, the 2 vocabulary mistakes. Number 1, the differences and similarities between gomennasai and sumimasen. Hopefully you have a better idea as to how and when to use each one now. Number 2, tissue versus napkin. They are fairly similar in English, but they are very different in Japanese, so just be careful with your use of napkin. Next, the 2 grammar mistakes. Number 1, how ni, e, and de particles are used when referring to locations. They do have some overlap, but they are definitely not all the same. Remember that ni and e are interchangeable in certain contexts, but ni and de also have multiple other uses. 2. The misuse of the sonkeigo and kenjougo categories of formality and when to correctly use each one. Sonkeigo is used for others' actions and kenjougo is used for our actions. And last but not least, the 2 common pronunciation mistakes. 1. Long versus short vowels. Be conscious of how long your vowel sounds should be. We shouldn't lengthen or shorten vowels when they shouldn't be. And 2, pitch accent, like vowel length, can change the meaning of the words that you're saying. If you're not used to pitches and tones in spoken language, it can take a little bit of time to be able to hear and reproduce these sounds accurately, so don't worry if it takes you some time. If you want to learn more about improving your overall pronunciation, consider checking out these videos up here. And as always, 最後までご視聴いただきありがとうございました。また次回お会いしましょう。See you next time!